Hello, parents. This is Dana Kay here with another edition of the Soaring Child Podcast. Now, you all know it's my passion to support families of children with ADHD, but I know I can't reach everyone on my own. So that's why I'm asking for all of your help. Will you follow this podcast, share it with friends and family, and leave a review? Because when you do this and when you do these things, it helps us reach more and more people and offer hope to more families of children with ADHD. I'll be so grateful. Now, going on to this week's episode, I am really, really excited about the episode. If you've been following me for long enough, you may have heard that I don't love cooking. Okay. You may have heard that I don't like spending too much time in the kitchen. And prior to me starting my journey, my family all secretly laughed at me when I started going down the nutrition route because I would be that person. Yes, that person who would always bring a roast chicken from the supermarket to our family potluck. That is why I am so excited for our next guest. She's the complete opposite to me. She loves cooking, especially gluten-free cooking. Debby has a professional background in exercise science and holistic health and has always had a passion for helping others improve their wellness naturally. Most recently, when her daughter was diagnosed with celiac disease, the journey with this autoimmune condition led her to recognize the importance of finding the root cause to symptoms and the need for support along the way, as well as a gift for recipe creation and inspiring people through social media. She is now part of our team at ADHD Thrive Institute, working with our social media department, and is it the brains and the beauty behind a lot of our recipe reels and videos that you guys see on our social media platform. Now it's time to welcome Debby to the Soaring Child. Hi, Debby. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I am very excited that you are here. Now, Debby, we've known each other for a long time now, and I remember when I first got on Instagram all those years ago. You were first starting out on Instagram as well. I mean, when would have that been?
I had to be maybe 2018.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. And so, we've been internet friends for a long time, and we're so lucky to have you now as part of our team. Just share before we get started what your Instagram handle is so people can check you out.
Oh, thank you. It's Thriving Gluten-Free.
Great. And so we are going to dive into gluten-free cooking today. So I'd love you to share with the listeners what really initiated your change to gluten-free cooking.
It was back in 2011. My oldest daughter, Cassidy, she was sick all the time as a toddler. She had recurrent ear infections. She picked up every germ in preschool, and she was on more antibiotics than I can count before she was 5. So we knew something was off at that point, and but every time we went to the pediatrician, they just said she's fine physically, she's fine mentally. She stayed along her growth curve, even though it was like the 1 to 5th percentile, it was low, but she stayed along her curve. And then time just went on, and I had another son, and he started shooting past her in height. And that triggered me to really dig deeper. And it wasn't until she was about 6 that her growth numbers went off the charts, and she got diagnosed as failure to thrive. So at that point, we were going back and forth every 6 months. She was just such a picky eater. We were shoveling pasta in her mouth, trying to get her to gain weight, and nothing was working. So in the meantime, I ended up talking to another mom at a party, who was telling me about her daughter who got diagnosed with celiac disease and how much she grew in 6 months. And my husband looked at me and just said, "You don't think she has that, do you?" And I was like, "I don't know, but I'm gonna check it out." So I made a phone call to the pediatrician right away, and they even doubted it still when I asked for them to test her. And then, of course, the results came back, and they were sky high, off the charts. And they basically just said, she needs to live gluten-free life forever and left me on my way. So,
Wow. I don't think
yeah.
I've ever heard that full story. I
Oh,
obviously
yeah.
know that she had celiac, but I hadn't heard the full story. And I think this brings me to a side note here, and listeners will know that sometimes I go off on tangents, but
Yeah.
trust your gut. You as mama
Yeah.
knew something was,
Literally.
yes,
Right.
you literally knew something was wrong, but the doctors kept
Yeah.
saying to you, no, she's fine. So
Right.
I think
Yeah.
listeners need to take away from that, you're there, what's going on, if something's wrong. So really listen to your gut. And that's exactly the same with my story. I didn't listen to my gut when I knew that the medication was not working. There had to be a better way. So you've been left on your own with your own devices, and told that you've got to be gluten-free for the rest of your life, for your daughter. So how did you approach the change? Like, where did you start?
Yeah, it was tough, especially back then. It was 2011. So there wasn't really the big social media presence. There weren't big Facebook groups. There wasn't even a lot of Google searches really at that time. So it was hard. And, I just had to get books and dig deep myself and try to find products. You had to learn what gluten was. I mean, that's the first thing. You have to learn what gluten is. They don't tell you anything. And then what foods can you eat and what foods can't you eat? And you have to go through your pantry and get rid of everything and kind of go from there. And there weren't products that make it a little bit easier to, like they have today. I mean, I was mixing my own flours, trying to make flour blends, and now you can go to the store and make banana muffins with gluten-free 1-to-1 flour with an easy swap of an old recipe, so.
So you're an OG. You are an OG gluten-free cooker out there. Wow.
Yeah.
I couldn't even imagine. I mean, I started on this journey, I think it's been like 10 years now. So probably just a little bit after you, but back then it was, we were getting a lot more products, but back in the day, it would have been hard.
Yeah. And I think now my biggest tip would be not to overthink it, because that's where a lot of struggle comes in, because there are so many naturally gluten-free foods. You hear gluten-free and it scares you off, So there's so many naturally gluten-free foods, and there's so many replacements these days for anything that you love. So
definitely. And really, I think that you're so right there, because when I originally took out gluten, I think I ended up in a pile on the floor with multiple panic attacks because, again, I was left to my own devices. I didn't have someone guiding me and telling me what to do next. But at the end of the day, most whole food is naturally gluten-free. So if you really, I think that's a really good tip, to just go back to the basics. If you really, most food can be made gluten-free. Most of your traditional meals that you have on a daily basis can be made gluten-free. So really stick to that whole foods. What do you think was your biggest hurdle to overcome when you were starting out?
I think the biggest hurdle was having a child with celiac disease. At the time she was diagnosed was really difficult. Because it was October, coming up is her anniversary in October, and right away it was Halloween, it was Thanksgiving, it was Christmas, and very quickly I had to figure out how do I make this happen? So it's always about, as a mom, you don't want your child to feel left out. And of course, family traditions that include food. We have a big Italian family, and everything revolves around
Pasta.
food, and a lot of pasta and a lot of pastries. And so that was a big challenge. And back then also, there wasn't a lot of food allergy awareness. So even in her elementary school, right away, they were having a Halloween parade where they were giving everybody soft pretzels afterwards, and she couldn't have that. So as a mom, that's the hardest part, is not wanting them to feel left out or excluded. And basically, there's just, I mean, you just have to think positively about it, because we just ended up, finding swaps and making, our favorite holiday desserts in a gluten-free version. And
yeah, and I think that that's a really good point to bring up. And as we go into sort of October, November, December, sometimes I like to tell families, they're like, oh well, look, I'm not going to do it until after the holidays. Oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do it until this. But I have to say that the best time to start is now, because if you start now, we're obviously talking about celiac here, but when we take it back to ADHD symptoms, when you start now, by the holidays, you'll probably be seeing some improvement. By the holidays, you will start to be making this your new normal. And when you do something on a daily basis, it does become easy, doesn't it?
Yes, yes. And that's the same thing. Like you said, either way, you're healing the body, and that makes it all worth it, really. And you find tips and tricks. It becomes more familiar, like, keeping cupcakes in the freezer for that special treat that they have at school, so
definitely.
So
how long did it take for you for it to sort of become that second nature?
I don't think you can ever put a time on something like that. Like any change, it's really a process.
Yes.
And it's just gradual. Like we were just saying, it becomes a new way of life. And the more familiar you get with reading labels and the food brands that are safe, the sooner that it will become second nature. So you're absolutely right. I mean, you have to get started. If you keep pushing it down the road, then it's just going to take longer.
Definitely. And I think, what we really talk about when we're working with families is that start slowly, start with breakfast or start with one snack at a time. Obviously with celiac, it's a lot more serious. I want to share actually, and I'm going to take this sort of in a bit of a different direction. Now, I do a lot of tests called a wheat zoomer. As you know, you've done one on your other daughter, and we see some kids that are so highly reactive to gluten, and to may have some celiac markers and things like that. I just want you to explain to the listeners what sort of symptoms come with celiac, because I want them to understand the difference between, having an autoimmune condition like celiac compared to like non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And the reason that I'm saying this, I looked at a lab test just the other day. I saw this kid had two of these transglutaminase markers, transglutamase number 3 and transglutaminase number 6. And they were really struggling going gluten-free. But when I see these two markers, I know that this kid will probably end up celiac. And if you can avoid celiac at all costs, it is best to do it. The way that you avoid celiac is not eat gluten. But once you actually go over the hump of actually becoming celiac, it's not a fun autoimmune condition. So can you just share what that actually looks like to listeners?
Yeah, I mean, there can be symptoms that are very similar. But like for my daughter, she was not growing. I mean, gluten was damaging her intestines where she couldn't absorb nutrients enough to grow. So it can lead to damage like that. And that can lead into other things. I mean, it can affect your mental health, as you know, it can affect digestive issues.
If your daughter gets exposed?
I don't even know. I'm sorry, what did you say?
if your daughter gets exposed to gluten, does she have a severe reaction?
She does not have symptoms. No, and
Interesting.
she has, yeah, and that's what was hard with her diagnosis and why it took so long, because she what did have those symptoms of a lowered immune system, but we didn't know any different to think that was abnormal,
Yeah.
besides her growth, and we didn't recognize her growth until it was later on.
Yeah. No, you're
Yeah, but
right.
there can be so many symptoms, which is the hard part about getting diagnosed, because there are so many varied symptoms that it's really hard to tell, or can be misdiagnosed as other things.
Yeah, I've come across a number of people that have been diagnosed, and they can range the symptoms, like even just a little bit of exposure once you actually go over into that autoimmune condition can make you vomit for days, or it can give you, the worst stomach pains and things like that. One of my colleagues actually got osteoporosis at the age of 30. And so to be diagnosed with osteoporosis at the age of 30 is really rare. And that probably was very similar to your daughter, that he wasn't absorbing his nutrients, he wasn't absorbing his calcium, and so it wasn't getting to where it needed to go into the bones. And so it can be quite serious when.
Yes, and it can be so different, like I said, for everybody, which is so hard. One of her friends, around the same time, maybe a few years after she got diagnosed, was diagnosed first with rheumatoid arthritis,
Wow.
another autoimmune disease,
Yeah.
until they dug a little bit deeper, and it ended up celiac was behind all of that.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
really
so
interesting. And I will tell
mhm,
you, when I look at these wheat zoomers, and it does correlate with ADHD, because when I look at these wheat zoomers, these kids are so highly reactive to gluten. Okay. They may not have crossed that border of becoming celiac, yes, yet. But if you know that you're so highly reactive and you continue to eat wheat or gluten, you could very much end up with this celiac. You could end up with
absolutely.
rheumatoid arthritis. You could end up with
Mhm,
osteoporosis. So let's prevent that from happening. I think
right.
everyone should be getting one of these wheat zoomers, no matter.
Absolutely.
It should be done at birth, or it should be done when they start eating food, to see the level of the reaction, because to avoid that autoimmune condition is like key to this. And so you
Yeah.
can have symptoms in the brain. You can have, mood dysregulation. That could be a sign of underlying celiac, or not
Absolutely.
yet. You
Mhm.
might be very close to crossing the border. And so I get really G'd up about this, because the amount of tests that I see, and then I hear doctors saying, oh, no, everything's fine. Everything's fine.
Right.
No, it's not. Let's make this change. Let's take this gluten out, and let's help our kids thrive, because it can end up in depression. It can end up in ADHD. It can end up in anxiety. It can end up in arthritis. It can end up in osteoporosis. These are
Mhm.
all such different diseases or disorders. But if we go back to the root, it could purely be from gluten, couldn't it?
Exactly.
There you
Mhm.
go. There you go. So, one of the biggest challenges a lot of our families that we work with find is getting other people on board, getting the grandparents on board. Talk to me about how did you get your, especially being Italian, how did you get
Yeah.
your parents on board and other families on members on board?
Yeah, I think that our other family members, they were a little tough, because they host all the parties, and they weren't about to go out of their way. And sometimes you have some tough family members like that. So we most of the time bring our food, to
Yeah.
big parties like that. My mom was one of my biggest supports, because she just changed everything in her house when she learned, that would help her. Because most of the time, if you know that this is going to help your grandchild, they want to do that, and hopefully they want to.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Not
and there were
everyone
some easy,
does.
I know not a lot of people do. And that's what's hard. And then, I mean, our immediate family was sort of easy because my kids were younger at the time. And so we had to just replace everything, and they're easily adaptable. So we changed everything in the house, and they were pretty easy. But family members are just tough because they don't always understand and they can't believe it. I remember my grandmother was still living at the time, my Italian grandmother, and she was like, gluten? What is gluten? She had no idea what it even was. What do you mean she can't have pasta? So, but I mean, it's so easy to just swap everything now, and nobody even knows the difference. I mean, most of the time, my family, I bring stuff now to family gatherings, and they won't even know the difference. I mean, you just have to do what's best for your family and your kids, and hopefully you have support along the way. But a lot of times that's why people do reach out now to Facebook communities and online support communities, because a lot of people don't have that support within their own families, and it's really helpful and can make a huge difference to be talking with people who are going through the same things.
Definitely. And I just, we've come across a lot of families that don't have the support of the parents. Making them understand why is probably the best way to go. And actually what that gluten is doing inside our program, that's our first training is to like why gluten's bad, what it's doing to the gut, how it can affect the brain, how it can affect all of these other things as well. And so making them understand the why, and then just saying that, this is what we're doing. We would appreciate your support. If you can't, we will provide our own food. And so unfortunately, sometimes it does come to that, which is really unfortunate, but that's when you need to reach out to other people to get that support as well. And I will say you made a really good point. It is best to change the whole household. For you to have success with your child, having the whole house gluten-free makes it so much easier. And you know what? Probably everyone will feel better when they do that as well, because the way that gluten and wheat are processed these days are not the same way when your grandma was probably growing up in Italy. I don't know if she was born in Italy or not, but, probably somewhere down the line. And so it is so different now than what it used to be. Another question that we get asked a lot, is it more expensive?
Absolutely. I will say yes. And there's no denying that gluten-free food is more expensive. But I'm going to say a big but. We have a family of 6. So price is really important to us and keeping down costs. And there are great ways to save on gluten-free food. And we keep going back to, the whole foods, naturally gluten-free foods are so important for healing and also for your wallet.
For sure.
Yeah. So I think there's just lots of things you can do to keep the costs down. Obviously, packaged goods and bread is probably the most expensive. I think the last time I checked bread at the grocery store, it was up to like $9.99 a loaf, which is insane. But you can do things like shop at discount stores like Aldi or Trader Joe's that have a wide selection of gluten-free food. We have both Costco and BJ's memberships. We shop bulk because we do have a big family, and you can get double loaves of gluten-free food at Costco. That's half the price of a grocery store. So there are ways that you can keep the costs down and not eating the bread and packaged goods most of the time. You can make your own at home. You can make your own snacks at home. Make trail mix instead of buying an expensive package of gluten-free snacks. I mean, it's just, there's so many ways to keep it down. That also, eating gluten-free, you're probably going to be cooking at home a lot more, which saves you from running through the drive-through or restaurants, which can bring down costs. So you might even actually be saving money.
Yes, let's say you're saving money, but you're also saving money for later medical bills as well. Like, it is a lifestyle change, but when it becomes part of your lifestyle, it becomes easy. And there are so many things you can do to keep the costs down. We don't eat bread. I don't buy bread unless I buy it from Costco. I'll buy the double loaf. But at the end of the day, the ingredients in gluten-free bread aren't amazing anyway. So we don't really buy a lot of bread. And gluten-free packaged goods compared to normal packaged food, yeah, it's more expensive. But at the end of the day, if you use whole foods, fresh, grass-fed animal protein, veggies, gluten-free grains that are naturally gluten-free, like quinoa, things like that, it can be just as cost-effective. The other thing is also making bulk of meals and putting them in the freezer. So
Absolutely.
You've got them there, buying meat when it's on sale and putting it into the freezer, those sort of things. So plenty of cost-saving tips. Wonder if I've done a video on that one that we can pop into the show notes. I think I've done a YouTube video on cost-saving tips that I'll pop into the show notes. If it's not in the show notes, I haven't done one, but I'm sure I've done one. So apologies in advance if I haven't. Now, Debbie, can you share with listeners what is the one lesson you learned through the process of change that is probably the most, yes, everyone needs to know this?
Through the process of change, I think just your mindset is everything with the change, because it's so easy to just talk negative about it. I mean, there's probably everybody listening can say, I have a friend or family member that says, gluten-free is miserable. It tastes awful. It's too expensive, but I mean, and with anything, it can get hard and it can be challenging, but I think turning it around and really thinking about that, what you're eating is making you feel well. And instead of all these negative things, because that's so easy to turn to. But if you just switch that around and think, I'm doing this for my son or daughter's health, our family's health, and really keeping that perspective, it really makes such a difference.
That is spot on, and that is gold. It is all about mindset. Let's flip the script and let's turn it into why we're doing this. What's the positive for it? And if you would rather spend a little bit more on groceries than have constant meltdowns in your house, then let's keep up and not do gluten-free. But I mean, I don't even know if that made sense. Rewind. So what I'm saying is, what would you rather? Spend a little bit more on groceries or deal with daily meltdowns? Spend a little bit more on groceries or have your kid at school getting constant phone calls, pick your kid up, they've done this, they've done this. So really that perspective, I think that's a perfect way to end this episode, Debbie, because mindset is everything when you are going gluten-free or making any change at the end of the day. So let's flip that script.
I love
Debbie,
that.
Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your knowledge and experience with all of our listeners. Just tell listeners again where they can find and follow you online.
You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest for recipes at Thriving Gluten-Free.
And I can tell you her recipes are amazing. And she makes the most amazing reels on how to do the little recipes. So if you need inspiration, she is it. Now, listeners, as I said at the beginning of this episode, if you are enjoying the Soaring Child podcast, I would be so grateful if you follow the podcast, share with friends and families, and also leave us a review. When you do these things, it helps us reach more and more people and offer hope to more families of children with ADHD. Listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving.